My name is Stephen Salinas, and I am one of the co-chairs of the Yale School of Management Education Leadership Conference. On behalf of the conference leadership, including Emily Enti, Spirit Lee, Aaron Stelson, and myself, I would like to welcome you to our 8th annual conference. Over the past 8 years, the conference has grown from a small gathering of just over 100 people to the rather large production it is today. In fact, we are proud to announce that this year's conference will be the largest Yale SOM Education Leadership Conference yet. We have many people to thank in the continued development of the conference. Certainly, we could not have put together such an event without the wholehearted support of our conference advisors and conference sponsors, whose sage advice helped us develop and shape the program you will enjoy tonight and tomorrow. I'd also like to thank the 40-plus Yale students who have volunteered to do everything from greeting attendees at the door to managing sessions to even designing our website. Without you, we definitely could not have planned this conference. The theme of the 2014 Yale SOM Education Leadership Conference is Reframe, Reimagine, Reignite. Reframe what progress means for education, reimagine the steps we can take together, reignite the movement toward a better future. Throughout the planning of the conference, we sought fresh ideas for sessions, new formats for discussing topics, and a diverse array of participants and attendees to enliven the conversation. And here we are today. This year, the conference includes tonight's plenary session, along with 2 keynote addresses, 18 breakout sessions, a networking expo, our first ever EdTech lab, 2 lunchtime sessions, a visit to the Achievement First Amistad Academy, the Education Business Plan competition, and 2 networking receptions. So, please join us after the plenary session tonight for a reception including the networking expo you see around you and the EdTech lab by Pearson. And of course, throughout the conference, we would encourage all of you to engage with us on Twitter via our hashtag Yale ELC. Now, we begin tonight's programming with the plenary session, Focus on Connecticut, which remains a microcosm for the education reform efforts taking place across our country. Tonight's session was made possible by the sponsorship of the Nellie Mae Education Foundation. It is my pleasure to introduce a former Yale School of Management Education Leadership Conference co-chair and the person who brought the conference to the Omni, and now who is the executive director of Achieve Hartford, Paul Diego Holzer, who will moderate our session tonight, Connecticut Stories from the Field. Thank you and enjoy your evening.
Thank you so much, Stephen, and the team of co-chairs. Another phenomenal conference. We are going to kick it off. I am not going to spend too much time talking about the bios of these amazing individuals up here. We have Myra Jones-Taylor, Daisha Toll, Karen Lott, Maria Zambrano, Garth Harries. You have those bios in your program. So I'm going to jump in and try to frame the conversation a bit, and then we're going to try to maximize as much time as we can for you to hear from these incredible practitioners. So this forum or plenary was designed to really think about what's been accomplished the last 2 years. And as Stephen mentioned, it may be time to reframe what progress means and to really think about how we make progress. Everyone usually says 2 years into something, 3 years into something is a good time to reflect, so let's do that. Let's do that tonight. But first, a couple quick notes about what started off in Connecticut as the Year of Education in 2012 at the State Department of Education and some of the things that have been accomplished since that time. 11 Commissioners Network schools serving 7,000 students, 14% of which have IEPs, 19% of which are ELL, 82% of which qualify for free and reduced lunch. 7 new charters, with 4 just approved yesterday. Woo! Alliance District program serving 30 of the lowest performing schools in the state, $40 million invested in those schools in year 1, another $87 million in year 2. Systems for evaluating evaluation and the development of teachers that all districts, I think by this year, 13-14, have approved. Not to mention Common Core standards and the transition that the state has been in for the last 2 years, and that continues to make headlines. So as we think about all that has happened and the urgency and really the pace of change in the state and all that has made Connecticut really a microcosm of education reform in the country, we have a series of questions. that we are going to let these panelists answer. But I thought, because this is about stories from the field, that we would give the panelists time to really introduce their work in their own way by sharing stories of how they've seen progress and some of the challenges in their work from their perspective. And I'm going to start all the way down at the end. I did not give you a heads up. Myra Jones-Taylor, thank you so much for being here.
Sure.
Kick us off.
Thank you. So I'll be brief, but I was thinking about this, and there are so many stories of talking to parents and providers, but I had to go with January 29th. I opened the newspaper, opened the New York Times, to find that not one, not two, but all three of the pieces in the op-ed page of the New York Times focused on pre-K. And throughout the course of the day, my inbox became filled with family, with friends, with colleagues saying, "Did you see this? Gail Collins, David Brooks, everybody's writing about pre-K." And so the question, put to us was, what is the greatest success, and then what is a challenge for the field? And I thought of this, that moment, because I think it truly crystallizes both the promise of early childhood and one of its biggest downsides. Pre-K is an amazing game changer for children. We know this. There's tons of research. The jury is not out on whether or not high-quality pre-K makes a difference in the lives of children. However, the jury is also not out on how a lot of other early childhood services improve the lives of children. Home visiting, for example, having nurses and practitioners go to the homes of new mothers, vulnerable mothers, high-risk mothers, and help them with the early stages of parenting, proven to make serious gains for young children. Early intervention, having children screened early, having them detected for delays, developmental, behavioral delays, behavioral challenges, proven to make significant change in the lives of young children. I could go on. The last one I will think about is actually changing the way we think about communities, working with families, working with parents, changing the dialogue there. These have not entered the pages of the op-ed pages. We have, right now, the federal government has $500 million on the table for states to partner Early Head Start with childcare. I have yet to see an op-ed about that. Infants and toddlers need our support. They need our care. This is a piece that we're not thinking about. Early intervention, home visiting, these are all things that are a huge part of preparing young children to make sure that they enter our schools ready to succeed and they have lifelong success. So I think about this, and I want people to think about these challenges. So when people were emailing me about all the great things that are happening around pre-K, I was thrilled. But it's important to remember that there's a lot more that comes behind early childhood.
Daisha.
Okay. Good evening, everybody. So my story comes in 2 chapters and is set in Hartford, Connecticut. On August 27th of 2013, last year, Achievement First and the Hartford Public Schools jointly put forward a proposal to the Hartford Board of Education to open a second Achievement First as a public charter school in Hartford. The first Achievement First had been very successful. It was one of the highest performing schools in Hartford, the highest performing school serving students exclusively from Hartford. #1 choice in the lottery, seemed straightforward, and this proposal was highly controversial. There were probably 200 people packing the Hartford Board of Ed meeting, over 100 in blue shirts that said education equals freedom, and quite a few with stickers that said achievement first, think first. My favorite was one displayed on a state rep's forehead as they opposed the expansion of this successful model. There was more than 2 hours of pretty heated testimony, and then all eyes turned to the Board of Education to see what they would do. And Rich Waring, who is now chair of that board, is here. At one point, he proverbially banged on the table, and there was a lot of heated back and forth exchange. And the key moment came when the mayor of Hartford, who actually personally sits on the Board of Ed every everybody was wondering, what's the mayor going to do? As somebody who sits on the board and appoints the majority of that board. And he said, in my time as an elected official, I have had occasion to do a lot of things for the benefit of unions, and I am a believer in and a supporter of unions and the role they play. But tonight, I am casting my vote for children. And it was approved. The school was approved 5-2 by that board that night. And the little footnote was location TBD. So that brings me to the second chapter of this story. The location TBD became determined in November, a couple months later, when the superintendent proposed that we would go into the Clark School in the north end of Hartford as a somewhat vague part of a transformation strategy, turnaround strategy at that school. And the parents were informed about it with less than 2 weeks, or approximately 2 weeks before it was going before the board for consideration, and that was presented at the time as their only option. And in lightning fast speed, the unions organized. Those parents got to the parents on the leadership council, the governance council, particularly fast, and by the time, literally within less than 24 hours, that we made phone calls wanting to invite families to come and tour the Achievement First school that was very close by, or otherwise engage and learn more, they literally refused to come. So within 2 weeks of that, the state representatives and others tried to rally in Hartford, called a meeting together to try to get information to the parents, at which point a parent read a statement that, frankly, the parent couldn't read particularly well, that clearly, I think, had been written by somebody other than that parent, opposing it based on, I think, very legitimate concerns about process and a lot of, frankly, misinformation about us and about charter schools. And so that proposal died. Subsequently, the district rallied, and we are still able to open that school. It's opening in a different location, a temporary location. And so my story ends with location TBD. And so the next chapter is yet to be written on that school, and I think more broadly on education reform in Connecticut.
Karen.
Good evening. My story from the field takes place right here in New Haven, Connecticut, starting not just 2 years ago, but actually 4 years ago, at the Catherine Brennan School, which was renamed to be Brennan Rogers School. Working through 3 years of funding from the school improvement grant from the federal government, Brennan Rogers underwent the work of becoming a turnaround school. So you very well know what you hear about low-performing schools, the issues that plague them. You name it, was taking place at Brennan Rogers. So much so to the fact that the superintendent at the time, Dr. Reginald Mayo, had received recommendations that the school should close and reopen as a restart. Unfortunately, or maybe fortunately I'll say, he did not take that advice. And in late August of 2009, just 2 weeks before school was opening, he hired me, someone who volunteered for the task at hand. And what I want to share with you is an incredible journey that took place from 2009 to 2013, where the school transformed from being one of the lowest performing schools in New Haven to, in 2012, leading the district with a 10% increase in students scoring proficient or above on the CMT. And it wasn't talked about much in 2013, but Brennan Rogers again led New Haven Public Schools with a 13% increase in students scoring proficient or above on the CMT. So what I want to share with you briefly is some of the things that happened in part of that transformation work at Brennan Rogers. So it wasn't just about the work that went into restaffing the school or the money that came into the school as a part of the school improvement grant, or also a federal magnet grant that the school received. So just imagine that being a magnet school and a turnaround school at the same time. But we were able to make significant gains in student engagement. And so we went from that level of school where students would attend infrequently and sometimes brought their worst behaviors to school, to a place where students were excited and engaged about learning. Brendan Rogers became a place where students felt bonded and connected with adults in the building. Brendan Rogers became a place where parents came to conferences and did not hear from the teachers, but instead heard from their students, their children, telling them about their learning, their challenges, their successes, and what things they needed their parents to help them with at home. Brendan Rogers transformed into a place where there was project-based learning, hands-on activities for students, steeped in technology. And it became a place where teachers were not willing to be complacent with the status quo, and against many odds and many doubts that the school could transform, the teachers united as a front to be vigorous about their own learning and to be dogmatic about creating an environment that was conducive for student learning. And I conclude that story in 2013 when I left Brendan Rogers School, and I would say I'm starting all over again, and I hope to be back with another success story to tell you about the work that I'm undertaking right now in Hartford as a part of Milner School, which is currently in partnership with Jamoki Charter School as a transformation turnaround model.
My story is a story that happened this past fall, so recent, November of 2013. And it was on November 9th that over 25 advocates from the Bridgeport community, parents, clergy, civic leaders, youth, came out to a Board of Education meeting to voice their support for Luis Muñoz Marin School to enter the Commissioners Network. And Luis Muñoz Marin School is a school in the east side of Bridgeport that serves a predominantly Puerto Rican neighborhood, a school that educates 900 kids every day, and of those 900 kids, only 15% of them are reading on grade level. And so Marin is really a school in dire need of transformation. And on that November night, advocate after advocate of the community came, spoke to a Board of Education that was largely divided on the issue. Many members of the board weren't sure that the Commissioners Network was the right approach for Bridgeport, the right approach for Marin. And speaker after speaker, the community urged the Board of Ed, their local elected officials, to take action on the situation at that school, a school that they all care about and they want to see changes for kids. And they largely succeeded. Later that night, it was a long meeting, but at the end of that night, the Board of Ed voted 6-2 to support Marin's entry into the Commissioners Network. And as a result, the school is now engaged in a turnaround process, a planning process that's concluding this year, and hopefully to see some changes starting this fall. And I share that story because it gives me tremendous hope as a Bridgeporter. Bridgeport is perhaps the place in Connecticut where we have the most divisive education reform politics. And it just gives me hope because the community really, when they're engaged with information, when they're engaged with solutions, actual pathways to take actions in support of improving their schools, they react, they come out, they support, they want to help their kids. And even when their elected officials are dragging their feet, they hold them to account. This is our school, we want to see a change, and we want to see it now. And so that story is hopeful and brings me a lot of hope for my community in Bridgeport. But I think also the Commissioners Network is a hopeful piece of policy because in Connecticut it represents perhaps the single most important vehicle through which local communities can be engaged in transforming their schools. And I think that's a model that should be looked at, should be studied, should be replicated because we need more of that. The community does want to improve their schools. They just need to find ways how to do that. However, the Commissioners Network also want to say, while it is a bold policy, I also think that it does present some challenges for the state, for local communities. I think particularly the fact that we're asking a large group of stakeholders that come to the table with very different interests, teachers, parents, principals, administrators, to come together and put together a plan that's bold, that's really going to transform the school. And I think that when the process is incredibly inclusive and includes a variety of stakeholders with very different interests, it's sometimes challenging to get to a really bold plan. And so I think that that is one very inherent challenge in the Commissioners Network policy. The second is I think that nationally and locally, we really have not gotten a clear sense of how to do this right. We're asking community members, we're asking teachers, we're asking people that work in the schools, that send their children to the schools every day, to come up with a plan. And they've never been asked to do that before. They don't know how to proceed in that process. And I think that a lot of support needs to be paid to those community members and those parents and educators that want to put a plan together, put forth to help their kids, but really need the help, the support. And I also think that just generally, across the nation and across Connecticut, we need to know how to do this right, because we haven't gotten it right many times. And so I think that while I'm inspired by the progress and hope that I see in my home community around this particular policy, I also think that we should dive a little deeper into some of these difficult questions.
So I'm Garth Harries. I guess my story, I guess, is about tonight to some extent. Being here on this panel as a new superintendent here in New Haven, having arrived 4 years ago from New York City as a person who put a lot of TBDs on Daisha Toll's schools in New York. And having in the intervening years tried very hard to build what I think doesn't exist, which is system-level success. Individual school success is great. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that later on. But that I think is a challenge in front of us. To extend the story about tonight, we're here talking about education reform. Across town, Melissa Bailey's colleague is monitoring a budget hearing where there are $40 million of cuts proposed from a group of alders to the New Haven budget, which is essentially proposed around, and what I would flag about this is proposed around the way the city, the process by which the city has historically budgeted, and the relative clarity of that budgeting. And that is really a story about transition, right? That is a story about transition of this city, of the mayoralty, of the superintendency, and how fast and how quickly do we go? The alders concerned, who I spent a little time with today, are focused on trying to make sure that the tax rate goes down in the city, and they want it to happen fast. And while I understand that, I'm also highly concerned about the impact of a $40 million cut on every one of my kids, including the ones at Catherine Brennan and other places. I will also say, I think part of what's the sort of interesting story about the state of education reform is I hope that part of what's happening across town tonight is that it is not only New Haven public school employees and parents who are speaking out about this, but it's employees from a broader swath of folks who are interested in good schools here in New Haven. We've been trying to build that coalition. Last night, I believe it was, when the schools when Booker T. Washington was approved, Melissa Bailey's story highlighted the lack of division, right? The relative lack of division. But the other side of that is where are we when where are folks when there's $40 million of cuts proposed to a system. So, I think all of that, what that says to me about the state of education reform is we're at a point of transition. We're at a very pregnant point. We're at a point when I think some of the old lines, some of the traditional lines, the other thing that's interesting about being on this panel, Daisha, I think we may be the oldest ones on this panel. That is new. Sorry to call you out.
Yeah, you're not supposed to point that out to a lady, Garth.
But some of the old traditional lines here are starting to change, and I think it's important for us to try and capture that as we redefine the moments that we have in front of us.
Thank you. Incredible diversity of perspectives on the panel. So I'm going to pose a 30,000-foot question, but because your perspectives are on the ground, I think they're going to be really interesting answers. And I'm going to start with you, Daisha, and we're just going to keep moving down. This idea of where we are right now, I'd love for you to start us off, Daisha, and then we'll kind of keep going down to Karen. From your perspective, and everyone should be including early childhood education as we think about all of these questions. is reform right now in Connecticut, is it winning, and what does winning look like? So how do we know that we are winning? And I would also just put this out. When you win, does that mean someone's losing? So you don't have to answer every part of that, but I'd love to hear your perspective.
So I think it's dangerous to define winning as anything other than achieving results for and with kids. And I think there's a danger in these conversations. I mean, I told you a story about a victory and then a defeat, and it was exciting, but none of it will matter until and if we open a school that's truly gap closing and life-changing, which we're hard at work trying to do, but it's only that that should measure our success. And so I think the plain truth is, if you look at Connecticut has, by almost every measure, the largest achievement gap in the country. We are the classic have-nots story, not just because our wealthy suburban students do relatively well, which they do, but because our low-income students do almost uniquely poorly, worse than low-income students in almost every other state. I think, however, so that is our reality, and frankly, we have not moved the needle significantly. I've been at this now, as Garth pointed out, for a while, specifically 15 years in this land of steady habits, and it's frustrating. Thank God I got to go to New York for a while and open schools there. And what I do think, though, undeniably, the last few years have been a change in that momentum. And I do think this governor and this, I would say, heroic commissioner of education who is, by the way, in the back of the room. But that's not why I said it. But that we have put in place, I mean, Paul referred to the ed reform policies. They are real. They are significant. We, thankfully, in the General Assembly, looks like we beat back an attack on the Common Core. So Connecticut is standing strong on the Common Core, which hopefully we'll talk more about tonight. Couldn't be more passionate about its importance to our country. There is a commissioners network where we're finally getting serious about the lowest performing schools, and some changes are underway there. We have chartered the first schools since 2008, so finally that opportunity is in motion. There is teacher eval being implemented statewide, I think in a particularly thoughtful way. So all of that is in motion, and it's exciting. None of it will matter if we don't actually execute with excellence for kids on the ground.
Is education reform winning in Connecticut? My perspective is that it's a bit too early to tell. Real change, sustainable change, takes time. And I would also add to that we have to be careful how we define success. And what does that really mean? Are we looking at just the measurement in terms of how test scores fluctuate in a school? Are we looking at how schools are impactful on students, on parents, and on communities? And so the work of education reform has a ways to go, and particularly in the area of looking at the communities in which many of these schools that are in need of reform, where those schools reside. So a school like Milner in the north end of Hartford has some very specific and unique needs that are not necessarily always taken into consideration in the draft of plans or the draft of the plan to turn around the school. So education reform will only win if it looks at the specific needs of students, looks at the specific needs of parents and communities, and with that allows those in leadership positions, the people who are on the ground, to shake the status quo and to do what is best for kids, which is often what is different than what has happened in the past. So if we're really looking to win in this education reform to really close that achievement gap, we have to be really willing to take a look at places like Milner School that is in its third iteration of reform and has not yet met success. And to look at that and to peel away at that and say, what is it that is bold and innovative that needs to happen for Milner? And let's strip away the thought about that there's any one way to do it, or that there's a body somebody that can come in and walk through the school and walk into classrooms and through a checklist say this is wrong and this is off, and to really give voice to the parents, to the teachers, and to the administrators of such buildings to really be able to make bold steps. I think we have become a bit of a cookie cutter to think that there's a certain way that reform can be done, or that there are certain people that know how to do reform work. And I challenge that, because startup work is very different than turnaround work. And turnaround work is something that not many people will volunteer to go into. Look for your best administrators to leave what's cushiony for them in a well-performing school and venture into a turnaround school, and they will tell you no thank you. And that's the land that I've lived in voluntarily for the past 5 years, because I believe that the work of closing the achievement gap for students at a school like Milner and other low-performing schools in the state of Connecticut is not just about test scores, but it's about reforming and transforming their lives, their future, and their ability to be well-equipped, productive citizens in our society. So reform is on its way. There's still a lot of work to be done, and I just encourage that the thought that goes into reform remains open and doesn't become a closed silo in the thought that there's one way to get the job done.
I would answer this question really not phrasing it as winning per se, but progress. We have made tremendous progress in this state. Over the last 3 years alone, we've seen communities become engaged in these issues. We've seen new charter schools be approved. We've seen schools undergo transformation through turnaround programs. And so steps have been made, and I think that it's better that we've taken a few steps than stayed at the same place we were 3 years ago. And so I think that that is something that we should celebrate, and I don't think we celebrate enough. However, I think that in terms of the way that reform has played out over the last 5 years, I think that we've really lost a really crucial battle, which is the hearts and minds of the people of Connecticut. I think by and large, the reform conversation has become incredibly polarized, so much that even just yesterday, when 4 charter schools were approved, you had a very strong contingent of people who were aggressively supporting the charter school proposals, but also aggressively not supporting them. And so I think that, not to say that policy will never have its opponents, but I do think that we have to be a little bit more intentional about how we communicate the messages of this work. I think too much we get bogged down in the policy and in outcomes and in seats for high performance, but I think we also have to make this the moral imperative of the state and win the hearts and minds, not just of the parents who are affected and the kids that are affected, but the people in the suburbs, the people in the state house, the people who are on city councils in the cities that have the largest achievement gaps. We really need to win that battle first before we can really claim victory anywhere.
So I agree that I think it's really dangerous to talk about winning and losing as being about anything other than student learning and students going on to success in college, career, and life. In the seat that I sit in, I find the rhetoric of winners and losers incredibly damaging and incredibly alienating. And I think to tell a quick story from Catherine Brennan in the midst of Karen Lott's turnaround. Part of what happened, so our reform team did, thank you. Our reform team did a series of visits to our different turnarounds early on, and there was our visit to Catherine Brennan was extremely powerful. We talked to parents and kids and teachers, and I will always remember one of the union steward there at the school saying to us, when we did this turnaround, we lost some of the best teachers that this school had. They decided to go elsewhere, and that's probably a good thing, because they didn't want to operate as a team in the way that this turnaround work was going to require. But they were really outstanding teachers, and they knew these kids. And so, those are the teachers that left Catherine Brennan, that ended up at other places, that by some definitions are the losers, right? They're the ones we managed to get out of the school. Thank God they're not educating those kids at Catherine Brennan anymore. Well, I think the actual story is a little more subtle than that, and I think it's important for us to remember that when we use language of winning and losing. Winning and losing is for students. It's not about the adults.
Myra?
Thank you. You know, I hesitated, I have to be honest, when I was asked to be on this panel, I thought, ooh, ed reform, that's not what we do in early childhood. We have our own ball of wax to, we're about systems building, and Daisha and I often joke that I'm the little bit more politically attractive issue.
Only politically.
Only politically, only politically. I am 4 years younger than Daisha. And she's fabulous. No, but so we have our own issues in early childhood, and so I hesitate to talk about ed reform. It's really not what I think about. In many ways, it's about building a system, but where we've had no system for so long when it comes to early childhood. But I will say I agree with everybody who's spoken already about this idea of winning and losing is absolutely not the way I go to work every day, not the way I lead my team at the Office of Early Childhood in Hartford. And I don't think it's the way we want to engage parents, certainly, and providers. And so I think it's about changing attitudes. It's about changing behavior. So I think we will truly have succeeded in Connecticut if I go into any community and I say, hey, do you have a home visitor? And everybody will raise their hand and say, yes, and it has changed everything that I do in my home. I think that we will have significant change. We will have made significant progress if you go into a home anywhere in communities in our most distraught, most traumatized communities, and you will not see screens on, but you will see older siblings, you will see aunts and uncles, you will see parents, you will see early care and education providers reading to children and children getting it and clamoring for more. It's really about changing the way we engage children. And I would say for schools, because I am here on an ed panel, it's really changing the way ed reformers, education professionals think about the earliest years of a child's life. I'll tell a quick story. I've often heard that with teacher evaluation, you'll have a principal who'll come into a classroom, a pre-K classroom in a public school, coming there to evaluate the third grade, the teacher of 3-year-olds and 4-year-olds. And the principal will walk in and see children playing imagine play, dressing up, singing songs, and the principal will say, oh, I'll come back when you're teaching. When I never hear that story again in Connecticut, I will think we have made significant progress. So it's really about changing the way we think about young children. It's not going into a 3-year-old classroom or 4-year-old classroom and expecting it to look like a kindergarten. It's about thinking about brain development. It's about thinking about how the children who enter your schools in kindergarten, if they've had significant trauma, significant adverse childhood experiences, and that there is a team in their community who can support them so that they come to you prepared. That it's not just about didactic teaching to 3- and 4-year-olds. It's not just about teaching them their letters and their numbers, but it's actually thinking about brain development and what is age-appropriate practice in schools. And that is when I will feel that we have truly turned the curve in the state of Connecticut.
So let's go one step deeper now. Let's pull out for folks as we think about state policy initiatives and how they're all playing out on the ground, right, and how your work plays out on the ground every day. What are areas of strategy or investment that you think that we're just not prioritizing or prioritizing enough? And talk a little bit about the impact that not prioritizing has on kids, parents, communities, the most important stakeholders. And we'll start with you, Karen. Thank you.
I have an answer for that. I believe that one of the areas where we're missing the mark in our vigorous attempts to get at transforming schools and to create high-performing schools, we forget about childhood experiences, the experiences and the impact of trauma on students. And we forget to plan systematically to include programs and services to address the needs of those students. So, for example, we know that many of the schools that will fall in reform, low-performing schools, are also high-poverty schools. Well, how often do we really look at and unpack poverty as a trauma? Students who live in long-term, sustained periods of poverty, what does that do to that child's development? And then perhaps if you layer on top of that those unfortunate traumas that students experience in their lives, they bring all of that package into school every day. And until we attend to that package that students present to us, and we really build in systems of supports in schools and in communities and for parents as well as for the students, we can never get to that high achievement. Now, some people know those services as wraparound services. And I want to challenge the thought around wraparound services that we can look at just some clinical supports. Perhaps we can make sure that there's a dental clinic or there's a physician in the school, in a health clinic, to push beyond that, to say that we really have to look at what are the needs of students for their basic needs for safety and security, to meet those students where they are with whatever those traumatic experiences in their lives have been, and to also extend that to parents, and to look at those issues of trauma that sometimes impede parents from being able to be the supportive, high-functioning PTO, SGC operating parents that we like them to be in theory. So I think that's one area now, working in 2 different school districts on this reform work, that I feel has greatly been overlooked. And we must attend to those issues. If we really want to pull back the layer and get to high student achievement, we have to have students who come into school and know that there is a system of support in the school community as well as outside of the school community to meet them where their needs are, particularly in addressing those issues of trauma.
Thank you. Maria?
I think that an area of investment that we really need to prioritize in the state is our teachers. I think that as I scan this room, I find that the majority of you are not in the education field, teaching kids in a school building, as principal. And
can we ask how many teachers in the audience?
Yeah.
How many administrators? How many policy folks? SOM students? Others?
Thanks for the survey. So my point is this: I think that we have to really invest teachers in this work, and I think that too much of the debate is around false rhetoric, around scare tactics and lies, and I think that that goes both sides. I think that we need to put an end to that, because if we're not really engaging and investing and seeking true partnership with the people who are in the position to actually deliver the change that we want to see for kids, then we are facing a critical gap there. And I think that the more that the reform community, the people in this room, can reach out and try to engage and invest educators in this work in a way that is not filled with rhetoric and anger, but in a way that's actually going to create a productive conversation that's going to result in results for kids, I think that that's an area where we really need to dig a little deeper.
Thank you.
So I agree with Karen about the trauma point, and I'd add resilience, whether or not, which is sort of another frame on it, even if there isn't specifically trauma, that great need for personal development or other things that our students crave. Many folks may have heard me talk about this. My favorite statistic about New Haven's public schools is that 5% of our student population arrives after October 1st every year. Which is not your typical model of what a school looks like, right? When you go to teacher school, they teach you to establish the norms for the first couple weeks and then teach to that, right, teachers in the audience? There are a couple of you. That distribution is not evenly distributed. Charters and magnets effectively take 0, close to 0, less than 1%. And we have some schools that take 10, 15, up to 29% of their student population at one of our schools arriving after October 1st. Right? And so that's a churn that I'm not sure that our understanding of school adequately embraces. And so I'd use that to say, I think, just the idea of model of school. There is part of the legislative package in the reform was rethinking seat time, rethinking standards. I will say, so one of the groups that I realized I neglected to ask in the audience, students in the audience, raise your hand. Hill House High School, at least. High school students, that is. Right, so the citywide high school student council, which I've been working with around my priorities, says quite clearly that the most important thing is to make high school relevant and connected to what these kids want to do with their lives and what their learning experience is. And I'm not sure we've really pushed the envelope on that sufficiently. And I don't know that the answer is online learning. I don't know that it's, what exactly it is, but I think that's we have opportunity in the law, but we have not really taken advantage of that. Most of the reform work that's happening around the state is in K-8 schools. It's not in high schools. And I think that's of concern.
Thank you. Myra?
I think, again, this is an exciting time for early childhood. And I realize I'm not sure if everybody in the audience even knows what we're doing in Connecticut, so I want to take 2 seconds just to explain to you. Around the country, we have a problem when it comes to early childhood. We have multiple funding streams, multiple policy agenda, data is a mess, and there was never really a system. It was not coordinated. Connecticut had this challenge. The legislature said, fix it. So I was appointed to create a team, to create a plan, and then now I'm leading this agency that is brought together all of the key programs for early childhood, all those key systems, brought them together under one agency, one state agency, reporting directly to the governor to think about elevating the importance of early childhood. So in terms of policy, we're the 4th state in the country to do this. This is a really exciting time for those of you who aren't aware of what we're doing in early childhood. This is a really exciting time in Connecticut. So I feel like I can't really complain or say we're not doing a lot because we're doing a ton. However, I don't want to sound like I'm not grateful for this opportunity. Governor Malloy was unbelievable in taking this challenge on and saying, yeah, let's do it. I mean, it was a 20-minute conversation with him pitching this. It was the most nervous I've ever been. And he said, yeah, of course, this makes perfect sense. Let's do it. He's a true leader when it comes to early childhood, and I really want everybody to recognize that. One thing that we're not doing, yeah, give it up for Governor Malloy. Give it up for my boss. One thing that we're not taking advantage of, and we are slowly now in the state of Connecticut, sadly because of what happened in Sandy Hook last year in Newtown, is around mental health. We have a plan in the state to come up with a comprehensive set of mental health for all children. And I am part of the group that's working on infant early childhood mental health. How many of you would actually believe if I were to tell you that there are 6-year-olds in this state who are identified and diagnosed with bipolar disease? Yeah. It is, well, good, I'm glad that people know. It is heartbreaking to hear stories from parents. That was one story I was going to tell, and I knew I would cry, so I didn't. We can do better for young children when it comes to infant and early childhood mental health systems. We have some of the national leaders here with Child First, with Early Childhood Consultation Project, some incredible leadership coming out of the state of Connecticut around infant and early childhood mental health, and this is something that we all need to be thinking about in Connecticut. So that's what's one thing I would say that we really need to be focusing more on.
Daisha?
So in terms of investing more, I think my overall theme is we're walking when we should be running, and that there are just a lot of students whose literally their lives are at stake, and the trajectory that they're on is not one we would want for our own children in terms of the opportunities they're getting on a day in, day out basis. The second thing is, I talked briefly about Common Core earlier. I think that is the reform that dwarfs all the others in terms of both its significance and its impact, and we're right at the beginning of it. I think you all know there are Common Core state standards which are being implemented across the country in, at least at this point, 45 out of 50 states. And they are a fundamental recalibration increase in the expectations we have for students, and as that means for all of us. And to make that kind of change in teaching and learning happen in every classroom is profound. And we are, I think, by and large unprepared for the challenge, but I don't think that should in any way get us to step back from the challenge, but rather just the focus on what we as adults need to know so that we can help children learn it, I think is significant, and just a tremendous amount of work over the next few months, and I just hope we don't lose our guts as a country in demanding more of all of us. The third thing I would just say quickly is I used to think the challenges of public education were just ones of scale and politics, and I think that those are real. But the other piece is I actually do think we have an innovation challenge, and I would say even as a charter operator who's supposed to be innovative, we by and large have not been, and we've executed a lot better or tried to, and that I think the kinds of innovations in teaching and learning that are happening in almost every other sector of our country are not yet happening at any kind of sort of scale and significance in public education. So we're in the process of redesigning our model. And I think there's just a lot. We could actually be doing a lot better by kids.
We have 10 minutes before we're going to open it up for Q&A, and I want to just pick up on some potentially conflicting themes that I'm hearing from the panel, which is a sign of a good panel. You are seeing here the need to move with more urgency, and yet you're also seeing the need to move with more intentionality, with more of a focus on quality implementation, with a focus on ensuring that we're bringing the community along, winning hearts and minds, with a focus also on making sure that we're addressing those huge issues that relate to poverty, like trauma. I mean, these things are enormous. And I'm not going to ask everyone to respond, but I would like folks who are particularly interested in responding to this, that, how are we to balance the need to move with such urgency, but yet the need to also bring folks along and move with intentionality? Anyone?
I would love to.
Go for it, Maya.
I was thinking about this actually while I was brushing my teeth this morning and thinking about
this is a great story.
the parable of the tortoise and the hare. If we are truly going to make change and get back to this question, it's not about winning or losing, it's truly about change. We need to change behavior, we need to change attitudes, and we are not going to do that bludgeoning people with ideas and rhetoric and confrontational communication or whatnot. It's about actually bringing people along. And so while I look at the numbers of children who enter kindergarten year after year unprepared, I have an incredible sense of urgency. I mean, I feel like the hare. I just saw my husband walk into the room. He can testify. I'm that Energizer bunny that's just running. And yet at the same time, I have a new staff, about 120 people next year, who have to think about doing their work differently. People said, and we have to think about the field, thinking about parents, about communities, about providers, thinking about doing their work differently. And they're not going to get it if I'm running circles around them because I feel the energy. I have to slow down and coach and bring them along and make them believe. When I was brought into this role and bringing together state agency workers from 5 different agencies, people said, "Oh my gosh, you poor thing, you have to inherit all of these state employees." And I said, you know what, that is the worst thing you could actually think about. If you really want us to make change, you're going to look at me and say that we have 120 employees who aren't going to be able to do anything, and I should just disregard them and bring in my own team. That's not the way you do change. I need to bring every single one of those staff along with me. It's holding their hand, it's raising the bar, but bringing them along the way, and it's doing the same thing for all of those providers in the community, for all of those parents who are feeling like I'm telling them to do something that they think is wrong, not having them believe that I know they have the best intentions as parents, but that we can help them. I sure as heck would have loved to have had a home visitor when my 10-year-old, my 8-year-old were infants. It's about conversation. It's about relationship building. That is where you actually get systemic, community-level change.
Anyone else? Karen?
So to strike that balance between the urgency, I really think it's important to move with urgency, but to move with an eye on sustainability. What good will all of this reform work do if we don't create structures that are sustainable when the money goes away? So it's not so much about all of the great things that the money can afford you and stipends for teachers and additional instructional resources. I really think the urgency and the ability to really hit the mark and to move the bar and to close the achievement gap is built in the sustainability of the systems that we create. So you can't have that short sight on for right now what's going to work. What's going to work years from now? What are structures that can be put in place that another leader could come in and tap into those same structures and continue the record of success? So I think the danger is if we look for these quick wins, if we look for things that sound good and superficially look good but don't hit the mark. And the way to really do that, to avoid that, is to focus on what's good for kids. What is it that kids need? Never mind what the adults need. What is it that kids need to be successful? And I think when you get at the core of that, that is what drives my leadership in schools, is to think about what is it that kids need? What needs to happen for this to be a great school? What needs to happen for parents to feel that this is a school that sets and embraces high expectations for their children? So we have to be careful of the rhetoric. We have to be careful about these plans that are lengthy and seem to offer a lot. When you really have to look back, how do they really get implemented? How do they get sustained? How do they get measured so that you have change not just momentarily in the here and now, but that you have sustainable change for schools?
So I've already been called old tonight, so now I'll be difficult. I guess in my old age justifies certain ornery behavior. By the way, I'm older. I'm in my early 40s, just to be clear. I don't want anybody to get the wrong idea here. Getting younger every day. Listen, I like to be liked, and I want people to get along. Life is so much nicer that way. But the truth is I am ready to fight, and I don't think this is going to happen by consensus. And I absolutely think we need to have more real conversations, particularly with families and the folks who are actually sending their kids to school every day, about what they want and what they believe and what kind of patience they have. And I think you'll find it's not a lot. And I think there is a true danger. I'm not actually one for fiery rhetoric. I do think it's gotten out of control. I do think we personally vilify in a way that's not helpful. But I don't think, Myra's incredibly talented. Maybe she'll bring everybody along, but I don't think everybody's coming along. And we need to be okay with the votes that go down 4-3. And we just need to keep pushing like hell, is my...
So, yeah, my turn, right? So folks who've taken my class at the School of Management know that I frame education reform entirely around this question, what's the balance between urgency and sustainability? And I opened that course with a case from Philadelphia, David Hornback, 1984, the work that he was doing in Philly. You could take it out of Commissioner Pryor's reform stuff, right? Accountability, school turnaround, teacher eval. I think teacher eval was there too. Might not have been that, but that, and Philadelphia is now not in great shape. And a new superintendent who's running and we sat down and looked at Bill Height's new plan compared to the David Hornback plan, and they've got all the same components. So I think that speaks to some of the challenges and the innovation and some of the things we've touched on separately in this panel. It's worth saying as superintendent, right? So my one request of the panel organizers, I needed a thermometer because I'm getting sick tonight. So that tells you something about urgency and sustainability. We all need to be doing this work for a long time. I agree, though, that the sort of moments of greatest hope for me are at the most detailed level. Like when we're actually talking about what student learning looks like in the classroom, when we're actually talking about parent parent experience, and we're not casting blame about that. I have found consistently in my career, whether I'm talking to charter leaders or union advocates, when you can get past, they're actually looking for the same kind of rich, engaged classrooms that Karen talked about. 2 quick stories, right? One of the things I do, I go on truancy visits in town. Not long ago, I went on a truancy visit. One of our students missing from one of our alternative schools, pregnant with her 2nd baby. We walked into the house into a cloud of pot smoke. She was being raised by her grandmother, as were 4 or 5 other young children wearing a variety of shirts, including shirts from my schools and schools from Dacia's schools. Right? That's a parent who needs help from all of us. Right? At the detailed level that some of what Myra's talking about, who's doing the home visits, how are we helping, and how are we helping all the kids that are in that home. The interaction I had, I think it was Monday night, with a teacher leader in the district who proudly informed me that he was going to try like hell to get his kid into Amistad, because that's what his kid needed, was that structure. There are other conversations about students that I have with parents about students who don't so much appreciate that structure and the way that it plays out for their students. So I think we have to be able to have honest conversations about what the learning looks like for students, and I think when we do that, that, I will say, is what sustains me, right, is when we actually have urgent conversations about how we change learning experiences on the ground.
I would just add one piece that I think is sort of inherent in what everybody's saying here on the panel, but I think that we have to also balance the rush for having really bold policies with the piece on execution. We have to get implementation right. And I think that as much as we push really rapid, bold reforms, it's really not going to matter when districts can't implement it, teachers don't feel invested in it, students and parents are confused about it. That piece is really critical. And I actually went to grad school and got a degree in education policy, and I remember a professor saying policy is like 1%. 99% of the success of a policy is implementation. And that is absolutely true as someone who's worked in the field. And I see that that is again and again something we sort of overlook. We are dealing with really weak institutions. Many districts that have a variety of leadership challenges, have a variety of resource challenges, and so when we're asking to really pursue incredibly bold and very different policies, implementation really suffers. So.
Thank you. So what I'd like to ask from the audience is that there are a number of ways for us to get questions. We've decided to use this medium in the front where you all have to line up and kind of box each other out. So as we move into Q&A, please just form a line, and it's first come, first serve. Use the microphone, please. Make the trek. It'll be helpful for everyone on the panel to hear the first question. So any questions from the audience? Just come on up. Thank you.
Do you guys think that peer teachers will help students more?
The question was,
opposed to having adults teaching the students?
The question was, do you think peer teachers might have a bigger difference as opposed to always having adult teach students? Is that right? Mm-hmm. Thank you. Who wants to take that one?
So I actually spent all day Tuesday with a bunch of folks focused on designing the best school, producing the best students, preparing the students as best we could have possibly imagined in the world. And one of our apparently not so breakthrough ideas, because you already had it, was to have kids have what we call running partners, where there really is, I'm not sure it should be one or a group, but that really, because one of the things I think we know about adult learning and student learning is that we learn by doing and getting feedback more than we learn by almost any other thing. So to the extent to which we can have kids do things, whether that's writing or leadership, get feedback on how well they did, do it again, get feedback on it, do it again. And I actually think, imagine, we're right now relying on a teacher to do that for 25 students. What if we could have really help students do it for each other?
I want to say, one of the reasons why the Knights of the Round Table was so successful was because it's a round table. Everyone feels like they have equal input. So if you would implement an open forum in the form of a circle, everyone facing everyone, opposed to looking at the back of someone's head, I think that would help a lot.
Thank you.
Good evening, and thank you. I am going to put myself in the category, Daisha, of you. I've been doing this for 19 years, and I was a little
Longer than me, but
I was honestly a little bit conflicted about coming to this conference because I live in a state that's viewed as a leader in ed reform and in a city that is kind of seen as a leader in ed reform. But I'm going to posit something, and I would love a reaction. I feel like you talked a lot about sustainability, about schools where kids inquire and they learn and they're engaged, and you have people who know how to make systemic kind of transformational efforts in the classroom. But I feel like we've reached a point where a lot of self-proclaimed reform groups and a lot of the models of education that are being replicated because they happen to get good test results are ones that are not inquiry-based. They're not about kids kind of being kids. They're not based on teachers who understand pedagogy and child development and kind of instruction. And so we're perpetuating this idea of reform that to me is really shallow and in some ways is creating the children of color and poor children who go to one type of school and kids of parents who have privilege and opportunities to go to different types of schools. So I guess I would just ask you to respond to that because I feel like the group in this room needs to hear that and talk about it because I think we're at this kind of interesting moment about how we define ourselves as reformers.
Great question.
So, I mean, I absolutely agree with that danger and risk, and I think it all gets at how do we define reform, right? So, for example, do we define the union-led turnaround school here at New Haven as part of reform, where they're working on mastery-based learning and a whole range of other methodologies at the high school level to try and get more engagement from students? I think what Karen talked about earlier about engagement and that being what a good classroom looks like is a counterpoint. Unfortunately, it's not what we oftentimes hear. And I also think that the Common Core, which Daisha advocated so strongly for, which I agree with her, another piece of the raised standards is I actually think the Common Core may unleash teachers to be able, as opposed to going a mile wide and inch deep, actually spend real time engaging students around a round table talking about significant issues. So I agree with the concern. I think we have to be really, it all boils down to how do we talk about what's reform? How big a tent is reform?
If I could add to that as well, I think there is a real danger right now with so much attention being on reform and actually a lot of money that's following reform. And so I think what the public has to do is to become more critical of what is presented as reform and ask some really deep questions. Because someone has had success in one area does not mean that they can replicate that, for example, in a turnaround situation. The dynamics of turning around a school are completely different than starting a school. So I think the public, all of us have to be wiser and we have to ask tougher questions. And sometimes we get so excited about this concept of more access that we forget to really ask those really deep questions. And really the core of what you want to get to is a school that's great for kids. And so how do you get to that place where it's engaging, where teachers are experts at pedagogy, that teachers are well versed in what they're teaching? You get through that through investing in teachers through professional development. So if you see a reform plan that doesn't talk about how to professionally develop teachers so that they can do great things in the classroom, then I would tell you that's one way that that reform plan is awry. So I think you have to look and ask deeper questions. Everything that looks good on paper isn't necessarily good for kids, can't necessarily be implemented, and in some cases can't even be monitored and measured.
Thank you. Question? You turn the mic on.
It's on.
It's on.
It's too low.
I wanted to just say that, there we go. I've been coming to the conference for 5 years or so, and I wanted to first congratulate the organizers for doing the very difficult and keeping the conference relevant and somewhat edgy. I'll say, I don't know if others who've been here, but the early years when I came, it kind of played out as sort of like a KIP, TFA kind of achievement first pep rally. And, and I'm really happy that it's getting richer and more nuanced. There's a little tension, and it's evolving, which I think was really necessary. So congratulations to everyone who's helping to make that happen. So my question is, I was a principal of a pilot school in Boston for 5 years. It was my first principalship. I got beat up a little bit. It was a career change for me. I went through the Boston Principal Fellows program. And then for family reasons and everything, I moved back to Burlington, Vermont, which is where I live, formerly the whitest state in the union. We still compete, but we're not the leader anymore, just so you know. But Burlington, Vermont is a different kind of place. The Burlington schools are about 30% non-white. The high schools, 35% non-white. A lot of refugee families and people from around the globe. There are some, American folks, and at least 50% free and reduced lunch. And so the question I have, I come to this conference, and I love this conference, but so much of the rhetoric and the conversation is about schools that are 80 or 90% students of color and impoverished families. And I wonder, how do we take this reform and apply it at a school that's more heterogeneous, right? Because that 30 or 40% of that school needs the same thing that your 80 or 90 need. But my school in our town has families on the Hill, and they go to the public school, and they want something different. And this whole conversation, they're not part of this. They want AP, and they want to send their kid to Middlebury and Yale, and they really don't want to hear about anything else. And the programs that we talk about here are taking something away from their kid. But if this is a national conversation, it seems like we have to be relevant to those schools. We have to be relevant to something more than just what's happening in urban America. Right, just outside, I'm sure Connecticut has lots of schools that are like that, and that the need for reform is there, but I'm having trouble personally figuring out how we connect this conversation, this energy that's about schools that are urgent, like it's yesterday, with schools that are in a different place, but they're urgent still, right? I mean, education is broken all around. I don't know if that made sense, but that's kind of stuff I think about.
So these are really easy questions.
The easy questions are really appreciated. I think that's such a good question. So let me start with testing the audience on some quick facts. So what percent of kids from families in the top quartile of income in this country graduate from college? The wealthiest quartile families in this country, what percent of their children graduate from college? 80%. The bottom quartile of income, what percent? 8%, 10% by some studies. So what I think is interesting and speaks directly to the question is the middle two quartiles combined, middle class America. What percent of the kids from those families graduate from college?
25.
In the 30s, right? 33, 34, 35%. So we have a middle class problem in this country that is significant, speaks to our sort of collective future as well as, of course, the future of those students. And the truth is it's been hidden by test scores that are pitched to way too low a feel-good bar, that especially has been focused on making sort of middle-class communities, frankly, feel like, oh, our kids are going to great schools. And I do think the Common Core is going to expose that. It will widen the achievement gap, but it will also it will show the achievement gap is wider than we believe for those low-income students, unfortunately. But it will also show that we have a middle-class educational crisis in this country when compared to true college readiness or international competitiveness. And I just pray to goodness that our suburban families primarily stand strong and don't back down from that. Don't blame the messenger in that situation. But I think it's a real issue. The only thing I would say is the parents of the kids we serve also want AP and also want their kids to be able to go to the top colleges in this country. And I think to somewhat speak to the last question, and I've been a part of it, but there's been this kind of classic divide in education between the no excuses crowd, which is focused on rigor and high expectations and some amount of structure, and the progressive crowd that's been focused on student agency and interest-based learning and project-based learning and sort of progressive pedagogy. And I actually think the magic's going to happen when we bring the two together. And I think that's going to work for the for kids across the spectrum.
the answers? That was a tough question. Please.
Hey, everyone. My question is pretty quick, and I think you all will probably expect it. So as we think about coming to the great state of Connecticut, what's the best lesson you learned and something that we should avoid as we think about community, building bridges? I think the thing that I'm most concerned about is delivering a great school. And for a lot of us, it's working with our kids, getting them ready, getting them to and through college. But how do we bring community along in that conversation where we're not distracting from the day-to-day excellence? Because I feel like we get slammed for not building those bridges, but most of us are just trying to run a great school every single day. And so when you think about your collective work in your communities, how should we start to think about that?
I would say that first, really invest in your messengers. You or your school principal doesn't have to be the person in the community building those relationships, having a presence in the meetings that matter and in the events that matter in the community. There can be parents, there can be teachers, there can be stakeholders that care about your students, care about your school, and want to be those ambassadors. And so I think that being very careful and purposeful about selecting those people is really important. And then in terms of things to avoid, I think particularly in low-income communities where there's been a history and a legacy of disenfranchisement, I would say don't make promises you can't keep. Really be honest with people and say, look, this is hard work. We're dealing with a lot of issues inside and outside of school, and we're going to try to do the best we can, and we need your help. And I think that we can get our kids to a great place. But be really truthful and honest. I think people appreciate that.
Anyone else want to say? Good question. All right, we've got time for one more question. So it's all you. It's all you.
This is awesome. This is my first time. My name is Giselle Jacobs. This is my first time at one of the education reform conferences, and I'm excited to be here. I actually, myself and my Hispanic parent liaison volunteer sitting over there, Naisha, we left another forum to come to this one, and it was on social justice. And my supervisor didn't see the importance of our being here, because the work that we do in the community in doing outreach to children and families has more to do with incarceration. But we are bringing awareness to the families in the community as it relates to incarceration and keeping our children out of jail. Now, we consider ourselves ordinary people, ordinary community members, parents. My son attends Achievement First, Hartford. And although his teachers described him as a genius just last week, a genius, his reading level has gone up. He is in the way up since beginning, like over the charts for him being in the 4th grade, which is amazing and necessary, because statistics says that if our children are not reading at grade level by the 3rd grade, there are some folks out there that's already building jail cells for them. However, we are here to dispel the myth that just because a child has a parent or parents whom have been incarcerated means that they are 6 times more likely to end up incarcerated themselves. That is a myth. There is no basis for that information. And we just heard an expert on the panel at that other Yale building say that. And it was a myth. I didn't get a chance to say it to them, so I'm saying it to you guys. However, Ms. Karen, you are a woman after my own heart. I agree. I agree with what you shared about it not being a cookie-cutter solution. Although my child is doing very well at Achievement First, I'm going to try to transfer him to Milner, Jamoki.
That's why we came
It's all
tonight.
about choice.
I also am very empathetic to parents who have infants and toddlers dealing with mental health issues. I have them in my family. I'm a grandmother, don't look like it, but I'm a grandmother.
Black don't crack.
And my grandchildren, and it's very important that we bring help into the homes. We're out doing outreach, performing outreach on a daily basis, and we are going into the homes. But we need to be mindful who we are sending into those homes, because we want the children to remain in the homes. I constantly get emails from those folks with the positions, and I love nurses, got best friends, there's nurses and all of that, you know, positions and, you know, those status. We need our parents and our community members to feel equal, not less than, no big eyes, little U's, but equal. We need not continue to be being brought to the tables and asked for our opinions and our experiences just for it to be nil and void. For show, because it seems that way at times.
This is set up.
And I know you said it was a question. My question.
Because you just earned yourself a spot on next year's panel.
My question. Please send help into the homes. But I beg of you to not discount those of us who are already out in the community going into the homes. Work with us, even us volunteers. You may get better results. My question to you guys is, in your position, what because I got to be careful, because I said Karen was a woman after my own heart, and she said, you know, never mind the parents, and but how do we get the parents to see the importance of our children reading levels being where they need to be? When I was that's my question. But what I want, that's my question. Because when I was a kid, listen, really, when I was a kid, I never saw my mother and my grandmother without a book in their hands. Yeah. And they had challenges that they were dealing with, but they always had a book in their hands. And that's what we share with our parents when we're out in the community. But how can you, in the position that you're in, help the parents to understand the importance of reading themselves? And if they can't read, let them know we'll help them, and we'll help you to help them.
Yeah.
Or Karen, you know you have to answer this one.
I will answer this question. It is a tiered approach, because it's not just the school being able to send that message of how important reading is to parents, but it's also other pieces of the community that's in schools who can also deliver that same message. It's about bringing community services into the school and offering adult literacy classes for those adults that need it. And it's also about creating within kids the resilience and the desire to love to read that withstands what else other people in their household may or may not be doing. So it's incumbent upon schools to build a culture of reading where kids are excited about reading regardless of their grade level, that we give them texts that they can access and be excited about reading, that we foster a love for reading, that we read not just at our desk, we read in the cafeteria, we read in the library, and that we create an environment that's excited for kids about reading. Milner School just last week prior to vacation had the first Scholastic Book Fair, maybe ever, where our students were able to come in and shop and purchase books, come in with their families, select books. Our Catholic Charities, our great community schools partner, provided a $5 voucher for every child so every child could have a book. And on every occasion, thank you. And on every occasion, we put books in the hands of kids. For Christmas, we had different organizations come in and donate books, and every child, every one of our 420 kids received a book at Christmas. So it's about how do you foster a love for reading for kids, despite what may or may not be happening in their home.
Can I just add one thing?
All right, Myra, close us out.
If I could just add one thing about this, something that's so important about literacy that people don't know. Early literacy actually begins when you take an infant and you look at that child and you talk to him. Parents do not actually look. There's research. Parents are not looking at their children anymore. They're not talking. There's people say, oh, I don't talk to that baby until he starts talking back. You actually build literacy skills, eye contact and talking. And then two other things I'll say. Picture books are incredible tools in the hands of parents with low literacy. It's about the practice of opening a book. It's about telling a story. Photo albums are picture books. There are things that we have in our homes, in our low-income families, every day that can be used to engage families in teaching, in literacy. The other thing, so there are picture books. The other thing is telling stories to children. You don't have to be literate to tell a good story. And that is about pattern making. It's about anticipating what's going to come next. It's just the rhythm of language that is so critical in building young children's, building those synapses for early literacy. So there are things that we can do for families with low literacy that can change outcomes for their children and have them become better readers than they are themselves.
Great. I just want to take a moment to thank all those who asked the question and apologize that we're going to have to wrap this up. Thank you to this wonderful panel. Can we get a round of applause for them? Yeah, Yale School of Management, close us out.
Hi everyone, I'm Spirit Yiching Li. I'm the second-year student in the Yale School of Management and the co-chair of this conference. So first of all, thank you our panelists and moderator for giving us so many wonderful stories from the field. And also thank you to our sponsor, Minnie May. So now our happy hour starts. So while you're drinking and meeting with friends, don't miss the opportunities to visit our wonderful organizations in the expo booth around you in the ballroom, and also interact with the most interesting and advanced technologies in the EdTech lab, which is there. So enjoy the happy hour.